Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be a little bit more on the topical side, taking a little bit of a deeper dive into Ukkomon. So Ukkomon is a very powerful Digimon in both iterations that we currently have, borderline changing the landscape and warping the foundation of Digimon as a whole. So if you're unfamiliar what the Ukkomons are doing, the Ukkomons, for being a colorless Digimon or a white Digimon, it can digivolve on top of any color, which is already super strong because it could be easily slotted into a lot of decks. It does have the free and ancient fairy typing, so it can interact with decks that are well caring about freeze or ancient fairies. Then on top of that, each one of the Ukkomons has an ability where when it's moved out or when another Digimon is moved out of the breeding or raising area, then we get to hatch a new egg and then gain some extra benefits. Most of the time, these benefits are going to be value and tempo based. So it's increasing the overall consistency in the form of BT16 Ukkomon, and then the promo Ukkomon, we're going to be gaining a memory, increasing the tempo. So these are already very powerful cards and easily splashed into a lot of decks, upping the overall aggression, especially if your deck actually has the space or ability to utilize them. Then we also, to complete this little package, have the promo Louis, which just exacerbates the problem even more because Ukkomon is a card that basically grants us half, if not a full raising phase, which is absolutely crazy to think about because we don't really have a whole lot of cards in the game that are acting on that level. But Louis, the fact that he's forcibly moving a Digimon out, and he's going to be like the promo Ukkomon, gaining us a memory when a Digimon is moved out, basically means that he's realistically a 2-cost tamer if we're going to be hard playing him with a Digimon in our raising area. If that Digimon just so happens to be the promo Ukkomon, then he's actually a 1-cost tamer because the Ukkomon will see itself. So you could start to see the usage of the raising area being more aggressive because of just the sheer amount of value and tempo that we're going to be gaining off of Louis and the Ukkomons respectively. Digimon seemed to want us to try to build this little Ukkomon package and complete that package with a BT16 tamer that's going to help us set up our big Ukkomon, which is supposed to be a boss monster that's constantly deleting Digimon and refreshing our raising area with new eggs, but this package isn't necessarily that great, and most decks will just elect to run anywhere between 2 to 8 Ukkomon depending on the deck. So if you're curious on other cards that are interacting with the raising or breeding area, there's not really that much that's really on the level of what Ukkomon's doing. The most close comparison is going to be Mimi, but Mimi does have her own sets of restrictions, and unless you have 2 Mimis on the field, you're not going to be raising out a Digimon and hatching a new egg in the same turn, which is exactly what Ukkomon is doing most of the time. We do have other cards that will just basically give us that half step versus Ukkomon giving us almost that full step, like Willis, Analog Youth, Shine Greymon, Ruin Mode, and Angemon, as all cards that are able to allow us to hatch a new egg. But again, these cards don't let us do that for the minimal cost of moving a Digimon out. We actually have to utilize these cards, and most of the time it actually requires a Digimon to be deleted, or in Willis's case, just playing him out. But the fact that we do have other cards that are interacting with the raising area is also what's allowing Ukkomon to be kind of strong and limiting the amount of counterplay, because as far as actual counterplay to trying to punish the opponent for utilizing the raising area, we really only have a couple of cards like Digimon Emperor, Lilithmon from Bagra Army, and Sukuyamon from BT5, 2 of which aren't really seeing any play at all. And this is kind of why lingering removal effects like Valkyriemon Ace and Shine Greymon Ruin Mode are super strong is because that is a way to be able to counter raising plays, especially Ukkomon specifically, because the second Ukkomon moves out, it will end up dying. You do kind of have something like that with Slayerdramon and its goading type ability for Examon, but again, these are all on the higher levels, and there's no real cheap and efficient way to be able to try to counteract raising plays to stop and stem what Ukkomon is capable of. And this is why people are putting such a heavy emphasis on Digimon Emperor, because he is one of the cheapest and most efficient ways to try to turn off that specific style of play. But that's not necessarily the healthiest thing, saying, hey, in order to try to counteract a card that basically a lot of decks are running, I need to run this specific type of card. And again, it's not necessarily the best of answer because it just tries to slow them down. It doesn't actually solve the problem. And the problem can go into various other different decks as well, because we could then utilize the fact that we're moving Digimon out to gain the extra value, even if the Ukkomon is just sitting there. So cards like Scorpiumon and Indramon and their respective decks for Dark Masters and Devas allow you to be able to put new Digimon into the raising or breeding area, so that way with an Ukkomon sitting on the field, you could just move them out and still gain that value. Then we got cards like Tai and Matt that interact whenever Digimon are moving out of the raising or breeding area. If they are a specific Digimon, then we get to gain some extra value, and because of the way that these cards were designed and when the game was made, these have a ginormous oversight because these aren't limited to once per turn, so you could kind of use them in combination with Ukkomon and Louis to try to create a cascading effect of just getting so much extra additional value for basically doing almost nothing at all, but utilizing the cards. And that's kind of the point that I'm going to be bringing up in showing you 8 decks that utilize 8 Ukkomon. So the first deck that I'm going to be looking at is going to be the ever so notorious Nuemon. So Nuemon is one of the best decks in the current format for lots of very specific reasons. One is just the meta landscape, and 2 is the use of Ukkomon, and then 3 is the current set of tools that it actually has to work with. So Ukkomon's inclusion with the Louis, again, just help give you that much more extra advantage, especially since you don't really care about digivolving into your level 4s because your level 4s are already super cheap to play. All of your Nuemons basically cost 3. Even your level 5s aren't necessarily the worst to hard play just because of the amount of value and advantage that they're going to be giving. So this leaves that space to be used for Ukkomon, so Ukkomon can gain as much value, and if you just leave your Ukkomons on the fields, depending on the matchup, because you might not want to leave them on the field, then the problem gets worse into a snowbally effect, or if you're just using them hyper aggressively, then it's just extra free damage that you're getting out of nowhere that you're going to be able to reset up over and over again every single turn, really applying a lot of pressure onto the opponent. We do have some really interesting eggs that the deck is playing around with Nuemon being a fantastic draw engine, because most of the time you're not actually going to be swinging with your Ukkomons, you're just going to be letting them sit on the field, basically act as removal magnets, and if the opponent doesn't have removal for them, then they're just going to give you that much more advantage for when you're hard playing your level 4s and digivolving on top of them. And then the fifth alternative egg is just trying to be more card draw, so it really forces the opponent to try to delete the Ukkomon, and then you're still going to be gaining value for that. And because the extra rookie spaces are just kind of whatever, most of the time decks are just going to elect to either run something in engine, another searcher, or just some floodgates to try to shut the opponent out. But you could already start to see how Ukkomon is starting to change the landscape of the game. And this isn't exactly the only deck that's able to do this, because again, any deck that really doesn't care about its level 3s can take full advantage of Ukkomon, like Belphimon. So even though Belphimon isn't necessarily seen as the most meta competitive deck, it actually is still a very strong and viable deck, just because Sleep Mode offers us some really good protections and Rage Mode offers us some really good removal on top of the damage output. And the fact that we want to actually move out our Ukkomon and swing wildly with them, just because we do have Demi-Meramons with on-delete abilities, allows us to be able to set up the deck while it's even digging and gaining us those extra values for the specific Ukkomons. And then we also still have Louis to be able to round out the deck to try to make our raising area as aggressive as possible. And even if we don't have an extra Ukkomon in our hand, we could still use the eggs in our raising area to be able to make a Proto-Gizumon plays as something to still sacrifice and get a cheap Digimon out onto the field. And then with the Ukkomons just chilling on the field, if the opponent doesn't delete them, then we have ways to be able to delete them ourselves. So with our Gizumon AT to be able to gain that guaranteed extra value for utilizing our Demi-Meramon eggs. So you could kind of see that just the inclusion of the Ukkomons is already helping decks like this as well. And even though that might be seen as a really good and cool thing, it's not necessarily the most healthy and indicative for the game because of just what Ukkomon is doing, being a very snowbally card engine. And speaking of snowbally card engines, as I kind of already mentioned with Tai Kamiya, just because it's interacting with Agumons being moved out of our raising area, this is what allows Ukkomon to be another really powerful card for this type of deck more specifically, because we don't really care about digivolving up into a whole lot of level 4s, 5s, and 6s. Most of the time, we're just trying to set up some warps into our level 6 and our level 7. So because we have that skipping warp ability, that's what allows Ukkomon to be really powerful for this deck, because we could just move it out, have it sit on the field, generate some passive value, and in combination with Louis and Tai, every time we're going to be moving out an Agumon, we're actually going to be gaining that much more value and that much more extra aggression for when we're ready to swing and make our power plays. On top of the fact that we do have some really good eggs that synergize with Ukkomon for this type of deck more specifically, because the BT16 Koromon just states when a card is removed from the opponent's security, it doesn't even have to be the Ukkomon attacking, so that allows us to leave our Ukkomon sitting on the field while something else is attacking, and we're still going to be gaining the benefit from the card draw for utilizing this type of playline. And we could even apply this to the arguably better version of this style of deck, which is with Gabuband. So they're basically playing almost in the exact same style of manner, where you're just trying to mostly utilize your level 3s to warp into your level 6s and your 7s. You're not really focused on your mid-level Digimon. You're still utilizing the same type of plays between Louis and Matt and the Ukkomons for your Gabubons when they're going to be moving out of the raising area to gain as much advantage as humanly possible. And this type of playline is just really powerful because it, again, further accelerates what the deck is capable of, not only in terms of its overall consistency, thanks to the searching Ukkomon, trying to help look for our Mats or our other Digimon, but to make sure that we also can potentially have enough memory to make our plays or make more aggressive plays thanks to the promo Ukkomon with its memory generation. So we do have some really good eggs that go inside of this style of deck, with Nuemon being a really fantastic egg for when our tamer is set up. Then we're going to swing and draw a card, which is pretty decent. It does unfortunately mean that we have to try to sacrifice the Ukkomon, but if we are gaining that damage to be able to make it so it's that much easier to close out the game against the opponent, then it's not really that bad, especially since Nuemon's drawing a card ability means that we're going to be that much closer to finding exactly what we need, and we might not have the time to want to just sit on our Ukkomons to wait for that value between Matt and Gabumon and Ukkomon. Then we have arguably one of the best eggs with Ukkomon, which only further cements why this card was limited to 1 with Bukomon, because if we Ukkomon in the early stages of the game, if the opponent doesn't have a Digimon, or if they just hard played a Digimon or whatever, then that allows our Ukkomon to be able to move out, swing it for free with jamming, and to continue the overall aggression of what the deck is capable of. So you could kind of see how even playing around with a specific style of eggs really benefits to how we're going to be utilizing and incorporating Ukkomon into these various decks. And that's further seen for, again, decks that don't really care a whole lot about their rookie slots. So Dark Knightmon is kind of in that similar vein, where our level 4s are cheap enough where we don't necessarily care about digivolving, and we're just going to be hard playing them to set them up, especially with the Digicross ability to even make playing our level 5 super cheap. So that way it allows Ukkomon to be that aggressive backbone. And speaking of cross-based decks, we also have Blue Flare as another example of a deck that could take full advantage of the Ukkomon package. We already know that Blue Flares wants to be as aggressive as humanly possible, and, well, because it's a deck that already still just doesn't care about the usage of its level 3s too much, we can utilize Ukkomon to, again, further enhance that overall aggression in that same style of manner. So now we have Metal Greymon that we're going to be essentially playing for 3 most of the time when we're digicrossing, and then that allows us to be hyper aggressive on top of the Ukkomons coming out and basically swinging every single turn, because it's going to be refreshing something in our raising area, ideally. And because we're in blue, we have tons of ways to draw cards and make the deck hyper consistent, on top of being super aggressive and control-y at the same time. Which leads us into not necessarily always utilizing this package aggressively, but we also can utilize this package defensively as well. And by defensively, I mean just it supporting control style of decks, because again, if they don't exactly care a whole lot about their rookie slots, then that just allows them to easily utilize Ukkomon, because, well, most of the time they're just trying to do other things like hard play level 5s or level 6s. So we have tons of different ways to be able to try to support that, with Malomyotismon and the Myotismon engine being one of the most recent examples of this, just because the deck is not necessarily trying to digivolve into a level 5, and instead most of the time just set up the Arukenimon and Mummymon Tamer to be able to play Arukenimon and Mummymon as the core value engine for the deck, and then Ukkomon just makes finding those cards and playing those cards even easier while chipping at the opponent's security if they don't have anything to stop us. Then we could still just utilize Ukkomon as some passive value as long as we keep refreshing our raising area, and it's going to get more and more value over time when the Digimon just stay around. And even though something like the hybrid style decks might not exactly utilize all 8 Ukkomon, they definitely could if they really wanted to, they're still trying to utilize Ukkomon in the same manner, because with hybrid style of decks, so you could apply this idea to all of the other different colors of hybrids, you're caring more about digivolving from your tamers into your level 4 Digimon and being able to build off of that level 4, which again leaves space for Ukkomon to, so you could already see that just from a gameplay perspective, how much Ukkomon is changing the overall landscape of the game. And this isn't limited to decks that are just utilizing a Ukkomon, because in more OTK combo-based style of decks, even though they generally do have enough rookies where they don't need Ukkomon, they're still thinking about slotting in Ukkomon just because of that consistency engine and value prospect that the Ukkomon is adding to the deck, as well as the potential extra chip that helps clean up specific damage count numbers that the decks are trying to hit. So Ukkomon definitely is having a very profound impact on the game overall, and this was just to highlight decks that are actually trying to take advantage of both Ukkomons to the maximum potential, and kind of show and highlight how and why decks are being able to accommodate these cards to be able to further accelerate them. And yes, while it might seem like it's a great idea, the fact that Ukkomon is just kind of changing the landscape of the game and warping the game around the usage of Ukkomon, and if you're not utilizing Ukkomon most of the time in your stack-based deck, you're trying to utilize the training cards, and if you're not, then your deck better incorporate an engine that's just as good as those two types of cards to be able to allow you to compete and keep up with some of the other decks. So we've seen decks kind of come in and out of the meta, but this is one of the primary reasons why we've seen like War Greymon and Black War Greymon fall out out of the meta because it has some really good tools to be able to tackle this specific meta for BT16, but because it can't utilize Ukkomon very well and it can't utilize the training cards very well, it just makes it significantly slower than all of the other decks that are utilizing those two style of cards to be able to make themselves move faster, and that's why a deck like War Greymon or Black War Greymon is starting to fall off harder than it ever had before, even though it does seem like it could potentially be good for this environment. So that's just kind of my whole 2 cents. I really think that Ukkomon, while it's a fun and interesting card, and you could do a lot with that little value package that it's going to be providing, it is very dangerous for the game overall because of just sheerly what this type of a card is doing for the game and how it's accelerating the game overall with the usage of the raising or breeding area.